Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is Innovative Pathways to Developing Solar+Storage in Low-Income Communities, Norfolk Solar's Qualified Opportunity Zone Fund. This webinar is being presented by Clean Energy Group as part of our Resilient Power Project. And before I pass this over to our speakers for today's webinar, I have some quick webinar logistics that I'd like to cover. You have a couple of options to join the audio portion of today's webinar. You can connect via computer, mic, and speakers, or you can connect via telephone. If you'd like to minimize your webinar console, you can do so by clicking on the orange arrow that you see circled. You can also click on that arrow to expand your webinar console. And one of the things that you might like to use your webinar console for is to type in a question or a comment. We encourage you to do that. We will be saving about 15 minutes or so at the end of our presentation for a Q&A with the audience, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. So please type your question in when you think of it. Don't wait until the very end. And a final note, this webinar is being recorded. We will email you probably this afternoon, or at least within 48 hours. We'll send you a copy of the webinar recording and also the webinar slides. And we also post all of that on our website at cleanegroup.org/webinars. That's a good URL to know because that's where we post all of our upcoming and archived webinars. So good content there. So with that, I'd like to now pass it over to my colleague, Marielle Mango. Mari is a project director at Clean Energy Group, and she is going to get us started today. Mari, over to you.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Before I introduce the presenter, I wanted to give a quick introduction as to who we are at the Clean Energy Group. Clean Energy Group is a national nonprofit organization based in Vermont, working to advance innovation and clean energy technologies through policy, finance, and individual project-level support. Our work is funded through support from a number of private foundations. We also have a sister organization, Clean Energy States Alliance, which is a membership coalition of organizations, primarily state agencies that manage clean energy funds. Clean Energy Group formed the Resilient Power Project, which you see here, about 6 years ago in response to Superstorm Sandy and the outages that hit the Northeast. Since then, we've expanded our work and are currently active in projects across the United States. The Resilient Power Project aims to improve access to resilient power technologies, primarily solar PV and battery storage, in low-income and otherwise disadvantaged communities. Our efforts include advocacy, education, and project development support. We work with state and federal policymakers to advance policies, incentives, and regulatory structures enabling greater access. We also author analyses and reports and host webinars like the one today. You can find all of these resources and more at our website, www.cleanegroup.org. In addition to the efforts I just outlined, we also work with local governments and community groups on individual project level support to ensure that solar and storage is being developed and implemented in communities throughout the country. We're not developers, but rather work as facilitators. You can see here that CEG has worked on over 150 projects across the country. Many highlighted on this map are located in the East and the West, but we're increasingly supporting partners in the Midwest and Southeast as well. If you're interested in learning more, I encourage you to visit our website. Today's presenter is Ruth McElroy Admonson. Ruth received her bachelor's in physics from Stanford and has dual engineering master's degrees from the University of Michigan. She has been an engineer for 32 years at NASA Langley, and she has been at NASA Langley for the last 26. Ruth is a member of Mothers Out Front, a diverse group of women working against climate change. She is also a member of the Hampton Roads Solar Group. Her home has actually been on the annual tour, showing solar power and her green roof since 2009. Ruth led a group of parents in installing a 700 kilowatt solar array on the Norfolk Academy, which was a $1 million investment in solar panels, the largest school solar array in the Hampton Roads region. She recently started a Qualified Opportunity Zone Fund for installing solar on businesses and nonprofits in low-income neighborhoods, which she'll speak to today. Ruth, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thanks very much, Marielle. All right, so as Marielle said, I'm Ruth McElroy Amundson, and I'm going to talk to you about installing solar in qualified opportunity zones, which are federally designated low-income areas. And these pictures you see on the first slide are 4 of our installs that we've done so far. So just to give you a little bit of background on me personally, we installed a green roof on our home in 2005. That's it on the left, and I highly recommend green roofs. It's the funnest house project we've ever done. It's really beautiful. It pays for itself, and it's just a great addition to the house, and I'm looking at it right now. And we also have solar hot water and solar PV on our house. And we've had our house on the local solar tour since 2009, so people can come and see the additions we have on our house so they get comfortable with potentially doing them themselves. We also live on the water. We live in the watershed of the Chesapeake Bay, so we do as much as we can to decrease our runoff into the Chesapeake Bay. So we have a pretty large wetlands buffer that we maintain. We have permeable pavers that keep our runoff from puddling and also keep it from running into the bay. And we have a 3,000 gallon rainwater cistern, that's it on the bottom left, that has an overflow rain garden. But that rainwater cistern runs all of our hoses, waters the green roof, and runs all of our sprinklers. We also compost all of our yard and food waste and use that for our kitchen garden. So after we did solar on our house, I was sort of looking around for something else we could do. And our kids go to this school, or did at that time go to this school. It's a 1 through 12 school with a very large roof. And it took quite a bit of time to get everything together on this, about 7 years actually. But I got a group of parents together and we formed an LLC, and we financed putting solar on the school at no cost to the school, and all the parents get their money back within 7 years. I encourage you to look at Norfolk Academy on Google Maps. These solar panels just showed up in the live photographs on Google Maps, so they look really pretty, and I'm really hoping to inspire some other schools in the neighborhood to do the same thing. So I was really proud of that project. And just to get a little in the weeds and show you how that gets financed, we use, as I said, this LLC to finance the solar. And if you kind of look at the pie on the left as the total price of the solar array, you get the 26% solar tax credit. At the time we did this, ours was 30%, and then you get about 30% back in depreciation. And then the rest of it is paid for by the school paying us with a power purchase agreement for the annual savings they have on their electricity. So there's no cost to the nonprofit, depending on the rate from that the nonprofit pays for electricity. The investors get all their money back in less than 10 years. As I said, for us, it's going to be about 7. And it works for any nonprofit or business. Obviously, huge advantage for a nonprofit because they can't take any of those tax credits. So using an LLC to get the tax benefits really helps. So any church, school, museum, et cetera, can use this. One of the kickers that makes it hard and made it hard for me to find the parents is that if you have a multi-member LLC, those people have to have passive income to take these credits. And passive income is a business that you're not materially involved in, something like a lease or rental. It's not something like stock or dividend income. And obviously for any of these installs, you could add energy storage via a battery to make that entity resilient in the case of a power outage. So after I had done the Norfolk Academy install, we got that finished in the end of 2018, and I was really proud of it and looking for other things to do. And at the same time, it happened that I had 5 weeks inadvertently off work because, as Marielle said, I'm a NASA engineer, I'm a government employee. We had the 5-week shutdown. So I was going around to a bunch of different organizations trying to talk them into solar. The Sierra Club was using me for presentations on solar. And at one of them, somebody asked me why I wasn't including opportunity zones in the ways I was talking about financing solar. And I had never heard of opportunity zones. So when I got home that night, I looked them up. And this is a shot of our local area, what the map for opportunity zones look like, where the blue areas are opportunity zones. And what those are is a federal program that in my mind has a really great goal, which is to leverage the private wealth in this country to try to heal the divide between the rich and the poor and try to leverage that wealth to improve the low-income neighborhoods. So the lines aren't drawn perfectly, but they do try to represent the areas in our region that have low-income residents and businesses. So there are financial advantages for investing your capital gains in those areas. So after doing the school, I really wanted to do something that affected more disadvantaged people. It was great to do the solar on the school, but you know, it's a pretty well-off school, and I was really hoping to do something for the people in the area who didn't have all the same advantages. So with my kids, we decided to start this Norfolk Solar QOZ Fund. And the things that came together to do this, first of all, the tax code that allowed these opportunity zones, but wanting to do more for the disadvantaged and not just put solar on independent schools. We happened to have some family capital gains at that time. I had that 5 weeks off work to work on this. So I went in and made a map in Google of all the homes in Hampton Roads qualified opportunity zones that were suitable for solar. And then I worked with some lawyers and accountants to set up the structure to make that happen. And then some of the downsides that I ran into pretty much immediately. First of all, at that time, the law in Virginia did not allow me to do a power purchase agreement with residents. So I couldn't put solar on homes as part of this program. And because of the way the taxes work, and I'll get into this a little later, but instead of creating a single fund or a single LLC, I had to create 3. My personal taxes and my kids became just insanely more complicated. And it was difficult to find a way to add the battery or storage to this financing structure because the battery doesn't produce income in the same way that solar does. But even with that said, we were able to create the structure. And just again, to get a little bit more in the weeds, it's the same basic financing as you have for the regular nonprofit or any other kind of solar financing where you get part of it back from the solar tax credit and part of it back from depreciation, and then you make an annual income from the solar electricity. But doing it as part of an opportunity zone by using capital gains to purchase the solar, it meant that I could eliminate 15% of my tax on my capital gains forever, and also defer any taxes I paid on those capital gains for 7 years. So you can basically push off your capital gains tax on anything you invest for 7 years and avoid 15% of it entirely. So most of the installs, again, depending on the electric rate that the institution pays, pay off with a small profit in less than 10 years. One of the sort of kinks in this is that you can't just invest capital gains because then you can't take the depreciation. And this was one of the reasons I had to create 3 LLCs because you have to have some regular invested funds that are taxed to be able to take the depreciation. So this method is most beneficial for investors that have both capital gains and passive income. And if it's going to be a multi-individual LLC that you do it with, you really have to have passive income to take those credits. So this is the way the structure works. I have 3 LLCs. At the top level, I have my Opportunity Zone Fund, which takes in the capital gains. And then at the same level, I have an investment fund where I put normal taxed money that is not capital gains and is not Opportunity Zone Fund money. And both of those flow completely into a second tier entity that's a Opportunity Zone business. And that can then take depreciation on the solar array because it's using the non-capital gains money. And that entity, the Opportunity Zone business, is what buys and owns the solar. And that's what the businesses that I'm putting solar on, that's who they write the checks to for the solar electricity. So all the pictures you'll see from now on will be pictures of the installs that we've done as part of this fund. I'm really proud of it. I'm really proud of that my kids were willing to do it with me and that we've been able to put up a lot of solar. This is a $750,000 family fund. We started it in 2019. We've done 5 installs so far. It installs solar in the opportunity zones at no cost to the businesses and nonprofits we're putting it on. And part of our contract with our installer is that we hire and train residents of the qualified opportunity zones as solar installers. So as well as giving the opportunity zones the benefit of the solar and a lower utility bill, we're also giving them some job training. So we're hiring and training residents of those opportunity zones and giving them on the job training in solar on these installs. So we've put in 5 solar systems already, and we have 2 more that are in process. The names of them are there, but it's basically 4 family-owned businesses and 1 African-American church. We did talk to each of them when we did the installs, trying to find a way to do a battery as part of the install, and 2 of them are planning on adding a storage battery, but it didn't go in as part of the original install, but we did price it such that they are battery ready, and they have an inverter that makes it so they can add a battery at any time that they want. And we did hire and train 4 Opportunity Zone residents as part of this. They were given the OSHA training and the NABCEP training, and also trained on the job. And I've lived in Hampton Roads for 30 years, and this is the first time we've had people of color working as installers for the local solar installers. So really proud of that, and hoping that can be a pilot that other people follow. Obviously, this is a small effort, but the reason we wanted to do that is to show it's doable and hope that other people would follow that. So when we get done, we hope to have 7 system installs done this year with 1,200 solar panels, about 420 kilowatts total. And we do actively engage with all the local environmental and social justice groups like Sierra Club and CCAN, Mothers Out Front, Motherboard 757, Virginia Interfaith Power and Light, et cetera. And we were part of the Opportunity Project that was run by the Executive Office of the President, and my fund manager did go up to a workshop to talk with the other people that were doing Opportunity Zone funds. And we were nominated actually to be one of the Forbes Top 20 OZ funds last year. We didn't make it, but we're hoping maybe we'll make it for next year. So one of the things that disappointed me at the beginning was not being able to do a home. And luckily in Virginia here, we had the Virginia Clean Economy Act pass. And that meant that as of July 1, it is legal to do a power purchase agreement with a home or with a low income utility resident, whether they're a renter or a homeowner. And at that time that became legal, we had already committed all of the funds in my fund for doing solar. But basically, I decreased the size of one of the nonprofits we were going to do to carve out a small amount of money, where this year we should be able to do 1 home install on a low income resident to sort of pave the way or be a pilot for others that will want to do this. That's actually a picture of our house there. It's not a picture of the resident that we've done. We're still vetting people and looking for a resident to do for this pilot home. But like I said, hoping to do that this year. So just to run through the process that we use when we're doing this, we have taken a look in Google Earth to identify good solar suitable sites that are inside the opportunity zones. If we find one that's willing to move forward, we do a design of the solar. We figure out what rate they're paying for their electricity, and we plan the payoff it would have. And with that site, we'll discuss whether they want to look at Solar+Storage, whether they want their alternate inverters to be battery ready. And then we'll develop and sign a power purchase agreement for them to make those solar payments to us off over the payoff period. Like I said, depending on their rate, it usually takes about 7 to 10 years for it to pay off. So the power purchase agreement will go for that period of time. I personally like having a very simple power purchase agreement. The one we did at Norfolk Academy was roughly 18 pages long, and it has a lot of legalese in it that I didn't think was necessary, actually. So I try very hard to have 1-page power purchase agreements, which I'm sure is horrifying any lawyers in the audience. But I feel like there's some trust between me and the sites that I've done, and the power purchase agreement can be modified with mutual consent at any time. So I feel like we can respond to anything where it might need to be altered. And so far, I've been very happy having one-page power purchase agreements. And at the end, I have some links, but on my website, I have template documents for the LLC agreements and the power purchase agreements so that people can pick those up and modify them if they want to do this same method. So after we have a power purchase agreement, we write a contract for that site with our installer. We install the solar panels, have them commissioned, net metered, et cetera. And for that payoff period of 7 to 10 years, the fund itself, the Opportunity Zone business, owns those solar panels and covers the maintenance. Our installer covered as part of his quote to us that he would cover the maintenance for the payoff period. And the site pays absolutely nothing there, net zero cost for the solar install. The only increase in their cost might be if they want to increase their building insurance to cover the solar panels, but that's usually a very nominal cost. So the entity buys the solar electricity from us via a power purchase agreement, but they're still net zero cost for this period because they are saving more from the utility usually than they're paying us for the solar electricity. And then after that payoff period, we sell the array, the system, to the site at a minimal cost. Right now, I'm looking at less than 3% of the original price of the array to sell it back to the site. So other benefits that are not financial that the site gets is their roof life is extended because the solar panels are not only protecting the roof membrane from UV, but they're also decreasing the temperature swings you see on the roof. So any roof material, asphalt or anything else is going to have a longer life with solar panels on top of it. They will also get some small savings on air conditioning, depending on how much of the roof is covered with panels and where their building is. They can get a decrease in their demand charge from the utility. And obviously, if they've put in storage, then they have the potential for continuous power during any power outages. And then this is an eye chart, but just a little bit more detail on how all these things work. I'm just sort of lining out the flow of we looked for investors, and that was our method. Our method for finding sites, using Google Maps, going to Civic League meetings, et cetera. Finding installers, basically just did RFP for local installers, and then finding the Opportunity Zone residents, again, going to Civic League meetings, using local groups like Mothers Out Front. And we've also just done some walking around and cold calls and cold emails, as well as some social media. So these are just pictures of the installs that we've done so far. Like I said, we've done 5 installs and hired 4 residents of the Opportunity Zones. Really proud of all of them, and all of the process with all of them has been working really well. All of them have been happy with the solar and happy to be sort of examples for the neighborhood and helping us find other people interested in doing solar. So I feel like they've all been great examples for the neighborhoods they're in. So our vision in doing this would be to, try to replicate it at scale. And really the vision would be that things like emergency shelters in the cities would have solar+storage. So any church or a school, a daycare, et cetera, would have solar+storage. So they'd be resilient in the case of a power outage, especially for buildings that are already emergency shelters for your area. I think that's really valuable. And then having homes in the low-income areas that have solar+storage, so they're resilient in case of a power outage, and same thing for businesses. So the barriers that we've run into in doing this, a big one is trust. When you call somebody and tell them you can put free solar on their building, they usually think it's a scam. And so there's a big trust level of getting past that initial distrust of something that sounds too good to be true. And one thing that's helped is having press. So when we have an article in the paper and we can point to it and say, look, we're a real entity. This is a real program. And then having buildings where we've already put it up, and those buildings and those businesses can verify that we're not a scam. But I will say that a lot of the businesses that have dropped out in the middle of the process have been minority-owned businesses, and I get that. These are businesses and residents that have been told many times by federal, state, or local programs hey, we got your back, we're going to give you this thing, it's going to be great, and then they have backed away, or for whatever reason, they haven't followed through. And so I think some of those businesses and nonprofits that we've been trying to work with feel like this is just another one of those programs where something's being offered, but it's going to get taken away, or it's a scam at some level. Another barrier has been that when you're going into a low-income area, a lot of those businesses, nonprofits, and homes have roofs that are in bad condition that can't really support solar. And many of them don't have the capital to do the roof repairs that are necessary. And that's very hard to wrap into the funding of the Opportunity Zone structure, because it isn't something that throws off income. So it's hard to package that as part of something that's going to pay off. So in some of the cases, we've been looking at partnering with other entities that do have funding for roof repairs, so they could go in first and do that, and then let the solar come in afterward. Another barrier has been incentive. A lot of businesses want some kind of benefit from day one to participate at all. And when I first set up this fund, I really wanted it to be somewhat short term. I wanted to be out of it by the time I was retired. So I wanted to have a short payoff time. And so if you're doing that, you really can't offer the businesses much of a savings. Now, I'll cover in a next slide. The investor we're working with now is not as impatient, and he's willing to give a benefit from day one. And that really helps to be able to give any financial incentive from the beginning, so people don't have to wait that 7 to 10 years to see a financial benefit. A barrier to putting in the battery is, like I said, there's a cost to putting in a battery, and it's not easily included in the way we do the Opportunity Zone financing, because it is not something that throws off income, and so it can't be part of a power purchase agreement. So it usually has to be an auxiliary cost. And the battery ready inverter can be included in the Opportunity Zone financing, but the battery is harder to make happen that way. And then obviously the first barrier was the fact that Virginia legislation, when we started this, didn't allow us to install it on a residence or on public multifamily housing. That legislation has now changed in Virginia, but I believe in other states it would still be a barrier. And then one of the big barriers after you get into it is just how Byzantine your taxes become after you form something like this. My taxes now just make me wilt to look at them. It's a very complex program financially and tax-wise. And so now I have an accountant doing my taxes for the first time in my life, which I'm not happy about, but it's worth it for doing this, but I wish the tax system were simpler. So partly from all of the press that we got and many articles that we had in the local paper, there was an investor in New York who had some capital gains, and he was looking around for what he could do with them. And he really wanted to do something good for the world with his capital gains. And he understood about the Opportunity Zones, but all the programs that he found were things, as he put it, warehouses that were growing pot, and places that were buying dilapidated real estate and then charging the renter, the residents, more for rent. And we were the first thing he found that seemed like it was doing a good thing for the world as part of this QOZ financial tax code. And so he contacted us, talked to us about how it worked, and then basically just duplicated our fund. My fund manager and I formed a small woman-owned business so that we could work with him. And he has the same as our fund, $750,000 that he wants to install in solar in Hampton Road qualified opportunity zones this year. And we've written a similar contract with our installer who's Convert Solar in this area. And they're going to hire and train additional Opportunity Zone residents as part of this install that we're doing for Rancho Solar. And just saying, he found us randomly on the web. We had not really been looking out for that, but we would love to have any other qualified Opportunity Zone investors that want to do solar either in Hampton Roads or in other areas of the country, and we would welcome helping them deploy those funds for solar. So when we started this, my true goal was to set an example that would let us duplicate this at scale. There's a lot of big banks like UBS, Morgan Stanley, Wells Fargo that have very large qualified opportunity zone funds already that already have capital gains invested in them, and they're looking for investments to make in the opportunity zones. They have billions of dollars to spend in that. But myself and my fund manager are not accredited financial professionals, and so we can't take on those commercial investors. And so what we've been looking for is some funding to set up a legal and financial structure to be able to take on the very large opportunity zone funds from the big banks. And we did a quick Google search, and just in Hampton Roads found over 150 million of solar suitable roofs that are in opportunity zones in this area, including some big institutions like Norfolk State, which is an HBCU, and ODU, several malls, et cetera. So we'd love to be able to have a larger structure like that. We've worked with the state level opportunity organization called Opportunity Virginia, and they have this opportunity exchange where we posted some documents on what we'd like to do as far as that. And if we set up something that did this at scale, it could potentially lead to, hundreds of clean energy jobs in the opportunity zones if this larger structure used the same scheme that we did, where we required a certain number of opportunity zone hires as solar installers for every job that we did. And obviously other people could do this in other areas of the nation. I'm very familiar with Hampton Roads and the institutions here and the installer here, but something very similar could be done in other parts of the nation as well. The qualified opportunity zones are a national program, so there's qualified opportunity zones in every state of the US. So our goals in trying to do this at scale would be a more equitable energy future where we'd be able to put cost neutral solar on businesses, churches, homes, nonprofits, et cetera, in the opportunity zones. We would be giving investor satisfaction not only from having a dependable return on investment, but also having those investors know that they're doing something with their money that's actually doing good as far as environmental and social justice. We'd be helping with workforce development. We'd be able to do on-the-job training in these low-income, at-risk communities. And we'd be helping with community resiliency, not only stabilizing the grid and offering those areas clean and resilient power, but diversifying their energy sources. And one thing that does is, for fossil fuels, a lot of the infrastructure for it is often sited in low-income neighborhoods and has disproportionate effects on the health of those neighborhoods and those residents. And by going to a cleaner source of power, you're going to lessen the number of fossil fuel infrastructure sites you need to put in those areas. And then obviously, if we could get storage as part of that, then all of these places, these communities would have dependable power, even in the case of a power outage. And that's very important for us here in Hampton Roads because of hurricanes and how often we do have power outages. So what can you do? I mean, a whole host of things that you can do even without qualified opportunity zones, like installing your own solar, putting solar on a nonprofit and get your money back in about 8 years, or form an LLC like we did for Norfolk Academy and solarize your favorite nonprofit. If you know people with passive income, encourage them to use this method to install solar. It makes a great tax write-off for them, as well as doing something good for the world. You can, if you don't have passive income, but you do have a chunk of change you're not using, you can loan that to a solar installer, and they can put in the solar and own it and take the tax credits. It amazes me that more schools aren't putting in solar. It's sort of a tried and true method now that you can issue an RFP, and most commercial installers will give the school no-cost solar with variable payoff times. It's very easy to do, and schools really have perfect roofs for solar. They're normally flat. They're normally 1 story, maybe 2. They're usually unshaded. They're just a perfect place to put solar, as well as being a great way to give students that example. So ask your city or school board to do that. There's some great reports out on how much that's already been done in the US. Ask your city to implement CPACE. I didn't go into this in this presentation, but that's a commercial property assessed clean energy financing. It's a federal program that allows businesses, and also in some states residents, to get financing for putting in clean energy and energy efficiency. Talking to your city about making emergency shelters resilient by putting in solar plus storage. So any kind of hurricane shelter would have power in the case of an outage for any residents that needed power for medical equipment or infants, et cetera. I'm a member of Solar United Neighbors. I'm actually on their board, and they have a great Google group discussion of a lot of different issues around solar. So I highly recommend joining that, or also joining the National Community Solar Partnership. Our fund and our business is part of that partnership, and that's also an interesting discussion about solar, and in particular solar in low-income neighborhoods. There was just a report issued by the Solar for All in DC program that's a really great look at how to do community solar and how to do solar in low-income neighborhoods. And then asking any investors you know of to think of this idea of investing in solar in the qualified opportunity zones. So quick summary, my fund is the Norfolk Solar QOZ Fund, and we've put in about 550K of solar so far, and we have about 200K that's in process going in the next couple months. We've hired and trained minority solar installers locally. Right now, we're setting up the power purchase agreements for additional installs for 750K more for Rancho Solar, and we'd be happy to take any additional QOZ investors as part of that, or either for Hampton Roads or for other areas. And like I said, we're looking for funding to set up a structure to be able to do this really at scale. And that's all I have, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Ruth. That was great, and we do have quite a few questions. I'm going to try to get through as many as I can, and we'll start with just a reminder. A lot of you asked about if this presentation is going to be available, and it will. The presentation, the slideshow, will be available on Clean Energy Group's website, www.cleanegroup.org, within the next couple of days. Ruth, some questions for you. Are all the systems that you've installed, have they all been grid tied?
Yes, they are.
Great. And a clarification question. On the slide you had earlier on in the presentation with the pie chart, there was a large, about a third of it was a white slice, and I think it was on slide number 5. It appears to be about 35% of the pie, but it was unlabeled. People were just wondering what that white part of the pie stood for.
Yeah, sorry. So the blue slice is showing how much income you get per year. And then I should have maybe made little clear blue lines showing that over the period of 7 years, that blue slice of the annual income goes ahead and fills in the rest of the cost of the system. So that white slice is what gets paid in the future years of the payoff period by paying for the solar power via a power purchase agreement.
Great, thank you. What is the difficulty of finance with battery storage? And does the utility where you live not allow the batteries to participate in grid services, or is there no economic benefit there?
Yeah, the utility where we are is Dominion, and as far as I know, there's not really a financial benefit. They do allow a grid-tied system to have a battery, but there's no way that I can add that to the power purchase agreement other than charging the person more than their current electric rate for solar or extending the payoff period. And like I said, at least for my fund, I really wanted to try to be out after 7 to 8 years. So I didn't want to have these long payoff periods of 12 to 15 years. And so I didn't try to include that in the system. With a lot of these businesses, it's very important to them that they're net zero cost, that they're willing to do this, but they want it to not cost them anything. And when I fold a battery into that, I either have to up the electric cost or I have to put the payoff time a lot longer. And so that's definitely something that's possible to just add it in. I don't know. I mean, the power purchase agreement has to be approved by the local utility, and I haven't tried that, putting the battery cost in as part of that. So I don't know if it would be approved. It probably would. I just maybe wasn't brave enough to try it, but hopefully, maybe if other people get involved, or if the other thing was none of the sites were willing to have a battery add a lot to their cost. So I didn't push it as hard, but if that was of great interest to one of the sites, it could be something that we do as a pilot to try it and see if the power purchase agreement gets approved with the battery as part of it.
Great, thank you. As to the local installers, how do you ensure that your local installers employ the local trainees, and how do you find an installer? Do you just work with the same ones over and over again, or how does that process work?
Well, when we first did this, we did sort of a survey of local installers, and there's really only 2 reputable local installers. So we asked both of them. We sent out an RFP and asked both of them to respond with a quote. And part of our RFP was the fact that we wanted training for residents of the opportunity zones. And that was really the deal breaker, where one of the installers was not willing to respond to that part of the RFP really at all. Whereas the other one, Convert Solar, that we're working with now, gave us an entire scenario and timeline for how they would do that training. They were a lot more used to training employees. He's a young company that's been expanding a lot in the last few years. So, hiring and training new employees was pretty common for him. And so he'd also worked with a local program here called Solar for Vets that's out of a local community college, so where they'd been training veterans as solar installers. So it fit pretty naturally with that. As far as making sure he actually does it, I have the names of the people he's hired, and I go out to the solar installs and take pictures of them. So I have pictures of some of them working on the site. I will say that not all of them have worked out as permanent employees. I think 3 of them have, and 1 of them has not been successful. But that's what you're going to get anytime you hire new people, is that some of them maybe aren't going to work out in the long term. But I really trust this local installer who does this. So I don't think he would tell me he had hired 4 people if he really hadn't. And like I said, I've gone out and taken pictures and talked to the folks that have been hired. So I know that that's really happening. And I know that he meets all the training. Everybody that gets on the roof has to have certain amount of training, and he has a whole binder with the training that each of his employees has gone through and what certifications they have. So he has all that documented as far as the people he's hired and the training they've undergone.
Great, and I guess in that same boat, when folks from the community are trained, how are those programs financed? Like an OSHA training, for instance, how is someone able to go through that program? Is it their responsibility, or?
No, he pays for the installer pays for all the training. Like I said, he's pretty used to bringing people on, and so he wasn't concerned about absorbing, a couple weeks of training time and getting them to pass the test. And so I think it probably added a little bit to our overall install cost. He didn't break out the cost of the program. He just gives us a cost per watt installed that he guarantees for all of our installs. And that included the fact that he was hiring some of these residents. Now, we only required him to hire 2, and he hired 4. So, he was already doing better than what we asked. And he's making it so that they don't have to pay anything for it. Now, they do have to have their own transportation, and sometimes that's an issue, but it's usually something where somebody else can give them a ride if they don't have their own transportation.
Great. How did you initially determine which homes, businesses, nonprofits in the Opportunity Zone were suitable for solar? And are you basically qualified, whether you're a resident or a business or a nonprofit, if you live there, or is there some sort of income verification component?
So for the businesses and nonprofits, I just pull up Google Maps in the satellite view, and then pull up the Opportunity Zone map in a parallel window, and just start going through and looking for roofs that are unshaded, that look like they're in reasonably good shape, that are the right size. Now, right now in Virginia, a business, I have to put on a 50 kilowatt array. So I can't do real small businesses. They have to have a roof size that will support a 50 kilowatt array. For the nonprofits, I can do any size. So I'm really going through, and we built a spreadsheet basically of those addresses, And then my fund manager had a cute way in Google to take those addresses and send them to someone's phone as a route. So we actually just did flyers and dropped flyers with all the candidate businesses that we came up with. As far as the residents, I did the same thing, just pulled up a Google map and looked for homes where they had a south-facing roof that was unshaded. As far as the income verification, they have to provide their tax form to Dominion as part of the interconnect agreement to show that they're below 85% of the local median income, which right now for a household in Norfolk, or at least in Hampton Roads, it would be about $38,000 a year is the number they have to be below. So I believe they just have to show 1 year of their tax form to show that they're below that. And there can be extenuating circumstances, like if in the last year you had some unexpected bump in your income, you can show a sequence of years to show that normally you qualify as low income, even if something unusual happened the last year. But there is an income verification part only for the home, for the homeowner or rental when we do a resident.
Great. And for the folks that do receive solar, has it been that everyone has seen reduced utility costs, and how significant?
I mean, like I said, for the ones that I've done, I have priced the solar at the same rate they're paying from the utilities. So they're not going to see much of a financial break until they take ownership of the solar. And I actually haven't, for some of them, it's been on for almost a year. I sort of wanted to give it a year so they would have a full year of utility bills to compare to their previous before I ask them if they're overall seeing a financial benefit or not. But for me, because I'm not giving them a discount, they're not going to see much of a financial benefit from day one. But I did ask all of them if what they were paying me was commensurate with the savings they were getting on their utility bill, and they did agree. So they're definitely not paying any more. But I was going to wait a full year so they have a whole year of solar and reduced utility bills to see if they're seeing a financial benefit. And that could be partly due to the change in air conditioning and heating costs, or especially air conditioning in our area. So it's hard to break out exactly what's causing it, whether it's the solar or a savings in air conditioning.
Great, thanks. And a couple questions came in just on reiterating how what happens after that 7 or 8 year mark. Is the system sold back to the business? If so, how much do they pay, and how is the solar system maintained or end of life, things like that? What's that process?
So when I did it on the school, they were a nonprofit, and my understanding is we are allowed to just give them the panels at the end. Of course, we haven't come to the 7-year point, so I can't tell you if that's going to work. But because my LLC is actually a business, my understanding is I'm required to sell it to them. I can't just give it to them. But my agreement with them is that the value I transfer, or what I ask for a purchase price to them, will be less than 3% of the original system cost. So if it was a $100,000 solar array, they will have to pay me less than $3,000 at the end of that 7-year period. I'm going to wait and see how the payoff works and structure what I ask for as a final cost based on, I have to stay in the black legally as a business, but I don't want to make an egregious profit here. So if I don't need to ask them for 3%, then it may be more like 1 or 2%. And something I didn't cover at all, but an extra income stream that it looks like I'm going to be able to get from these installs is called SRECs, or solar renewable energy credits. And that's a small, at this point, amount of income right now in Pennsylvania and Virginia for these systems where you get credit for being a renewable energy generator. So I will have that extra bit of income, which should allow me to make the purchase price of the system much more nominal. For example, with the Rancho Solar that we're working with, he's trying to make the purchase price at the end be more like a nominal $100 purchase price of the system, so that it's really no cost to the entity you're putting it on.
Great, thank you. And with all the legal and tax complexities that you went through to get this going, what was the timeline from really when you started this process to when the first nonprofit received an install, or the first business?
I had the idea in January of 2019, and I think we had signed legal operating agreements for the 3 entities in March. And I think we did our first, we had our first install committed to, I believe, by May, and it was in by July of 2019. And like I said, we were able to do 5 installs in 2019. A lot of phone calls with lawyers during that February period after having the idea and trying to get the agreements nailed out. But so probably a 2-month time frame of having the idea, of figuring out the legal agreements, writing an RFP for the installers, et cetera, and then a couple months of marketing it to the local businesses. We got in the paper, which really helped. And then, like I said, first install, I believe, was complete in July of 2019.
Great. A couple more questions as to battery storage. Do you think that the SRECs or other potential value streams would help improve the ability to include them as part of the financing, or is it really just finding the person who's interested in starting a pilot like that with you and going from there?
I mean, when we did the systems in 2019, I had no idea that we were going to be able to have any income from SRECs. That was really a surprise that I got basically in the last month. And so I never worked the payoffs based on that. It is possible that if an SREC income stream is going to be a real thing for the next, say, 3 years, that you'd be able to fold the battery cost in and still not ask the entity to pay more than they are now for electricity. Unfortunately, I've already committed all mine, and I can't unsign the power purchase agreements that I've already signed, but it's definitely something to look at going forward. It's a little bit risky because, as you're probably well aware, SREC markets can change pretty much instantaneously. So trying to depend on that income for more than a couple years is a little bit risky. But it is possible that SRECs could help with the battery install. But like I said, I just don't have any knowledge of how the utility would handle a power purchase agreement where the battery was actually included, or whether they would even need to know. Maybe the fact that the purchase price is actually higher just doesn't need to be something that's covered, although I think it probably ends up being part of the interconnect agreement. So I think the utility would be aware.
Thanks. Have you been able or had any interest in incorporating community solar into your model, or is that something that just wouldn't be possible even in the future?
I mean, that's why we joined the National Community Solar Partnership, is to see if that was possible. Right now, because all the rules about community solar in Virginia really just changed as of July 1 because of the Virginia Clean Economy Act, we really haven't had time to sort of absorb that, and can't really use it for my fund or for Rancho Solar because they're relatively small, and our contracts have been written for rooftop and not really for a more utility or community scale ground mount. But we are having discussions with that National Community Solar Partnership and actually with the Virginia Department of Mines, Materials and Energy that handles energy in Virginia, trying to have those discussions about whether community solar would work with us. In fact, we just had a discussion with a group here. We have a section of Norfolk that's basically getting torn down and rebuilt. That's a lot of public housing. It's called the St. Paul's Community Development Corridor, and they're very interested in introducing community solar. It's all an opportunity zone, so that might be our first chance to get a real look at whether integrating community solar with opportunity zones would work.
Great. Just an investor question. How much are investors projected to make over the 7 to 8 year timeline? And does that include tax benefits?
So the way I did my spreadsheet was to do my after-tax profit. So it's after all the tax benefits are included and after the fact that I'm taxed on the solar payments, et cetera. And I am not a normal investor. I came to this from the fact that we had done our kids' school, and obviously the parents didn't want to profit off the school. So we were all, just trying to stay in the black, but not make a huge profit off the school. And that was the mindset I came at this with. So I'm making probably averaging less than 0.5% profit per year over the 7-year period. But that's because I'm having a short hold period of 7 years. You can get anywhere really from 1 to 4% per year after tax profit. I know that most investors work in IRR, and I just don't think in that, but it's a reasonable IRR for these installs. If you have a hold period that's more like 12 to 15 years, and then you can really make your money back and have a decent profit. I just didn't structure my fund for that, but I think in terms of attracting investors in the future, that's the kind of hold period we'd have to look at, somewhere in the 10 to 15 year period, to get a reasonable amount of profit to attract new investors.
Great. In the future, after this year, do you foresee working more on affordable housing type projects and residential projects?
Well, like I said, I'm hoping to do one pilot home this year on my fund, and then hoping that, the publicity on that might inspire other investors here in Hampton Roads to want to take that on. So, and I would hope to be part of that. I'm part of a couple groups that are looking at environmental and social justice issues, and hoping that we can find the investors to make that happen if we can show that it works on the first one. So yes, I'd like to be involved. I personally don't. We sort of used our funds on this one, so I'm not looking at funding it personally, but I'd love to work with some of the investors locally that I know are interested in areas like that to make it happen.
Great. And I think this is going to be our last question. So we have a couple minutes at the end to wrap up. What do you think that the biggest barrier for individuals is in investing in opportunity zones?
I'm sorry, what do you mean by the biggest area of investment? You mean as far as in general opportunity zone investing?
No, the biggest barrier, for folks getting involved.
You mean,
yeah.
I think really the setting up the structure. Like if you're going to have an LLC to do it, then how you set up that structure to do it is really a lot of work. It's a lot more than I thought. And so I've actually talked to some local politicians here about setting up a federal program, because so many people have come to me and said, can I just throw 30,000 at you and help you? And not the way my fund is set up, and there's not a great way to do that. But if there were a federal program where people could just put in money and get some small reasonable rate of return, and those funds could be used to do solar, then I think that would get rid of that huge barrier of having to kind of do it all yourself for each investor separately.
Well, Ruth, thank you so much. We had so many great questions, and this was a great overview of the project. Thank everyone for joining the webinar today. As a reminder, you can find the slides and the recording on our website in the next day or two. I also wanted to let everyone know that we do have another webinar coming up. It's an introduction to virtual power plants on September 28th from 1 to 2 p.m. It's going to cover the basics of what a virtual power plant is and how it can create value. So I encourage everyone to register for that one as well. But thank you to Ruth, and thank you to all for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.